Hello and welcome to the Electric Wire Podcast. I'm your host, Kristin Gilkes, Executive Director of the Customers First Coalition. Customers First is bringing you this series of 6 podcasts as a part of our Energy Innovation Series to help bring you insights into this rapidly changing industry. Many of you listeners already know that Customers First regularly holds educational events where we try to delve deeply into energy and utility issues to help educate and engage policymakers and the public. With today's concerns about virus transmission, the podcast is proving to be an especially useful tool in keeping the dialogue going, even as we start practicing more social distancing and avoiding larger events. We're still planning on holding our power lunch on April 29th. We'll continue to monitor the coronavirus situation and look into alternate arrangements for that event if necessary. With that, I want to give a shout out to the members of the Customers First Coalition for sponsoring our podcast series. Our members are the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin, Dairyland Power Cooperative, the IBEW 2150, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, Renew Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Electric Cooperative Association, and WPPI Energy. I'm really delighted to have one of our board members here co-hosting with me today, Bob Stone of the IBEW 2150. Thanks for joining me, Bob.
You're welcome, Kristin. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So, Bob, we first have to address the fact that Tyler Huebner of Renew Wisconsin was just appointed to the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin by Governor Evers. Tyler has been a fair and effective advocate for renewable energy here in Wisconsin, and he is an active member of the Customers First Coalition Board of Directors.
He is indeed, isn't he? And I'm very excited for him to take on his new challenge role as Public Service Commissioner.
He brings a lot to this position, and as we discuss with Chairperson Valcq in our upcoming interview with her, she's really excited about some of the technical expertise that he brings to this role.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Bob, I have a couple questions for you before we get started here. So tell us more about the work of the IBEW 2150, and specifically, what's your role at the IBEW 2150?
So 2150 was chartered in 1964. Back then, it was primarily WEPCO employees that started the local union. Currently, we're headquartered in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. We represent about 5,200 members in a whole bunch of different areas. Our members work in utility, both nuclear, co-ops, outside construction, line construction, that's transmission and distribution. Line clearance, so you might see the people out there clearing the trees and brush along the power lines. We also have a manufacturing base of workers that work at a few different plants. Some of them make wind turbine generators.
That's really cool.
And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and some of them make power transformers, many different sizes. And we recently brought on broadcasting as part of 2150. So it's a whole lot of different areas, but it makes us a real diverse local. So.
And what is your role within the organization?
So I'm the assistant business manager on the utility side. We have another assistant on the outside. My day job, if you will, I spend a lot of my time in the customer service area of We Energies. That would be call center, billing, meter and service technicians, meter readers, that type of thing, and just assisting them and supporting them and working with the management of the company to work through issues that might be going on in that area. I do spend a fair amount of time in the political and regulatory areas that affect our members. As you said, I'm on the board of the Customers First Coalition. I'm also on the board of the Utility Workers Coalition, which is a group of utility locals throughout the state of Wisconsin. So
good. So tell us more about the IBEW's history with the Customers First Coalition. Why are you members?
Well, in the early 2000s, I believe we joined CFC in 2002, January of 2002.
Sounds about right.
And back then, deregulation was the big buzzword. A lot of states were really looking very seriously at that. Some of them actually went that direction, backed away from it a little bit in some cases not, I guess. But that was something we were not interested in. We feel that a regulated model brings more stability to the whole big picture, and When we looked around, we saw that we shared common interests with the CFC at the time, and that's maintaining safe, reliable, and affordable electricity. So our thing was taking a careful approach. We weren't saying no, but we wanted to take a careful approach and not make any drastic changes. So again, going back to protecting the customers and working families and making sure things are stable and affordable.
Bob, you are a member of the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change. How do you view your role on that task force, and what do you hope to accomplish there?
Well, there's a lot of things that's a big undertaking, is the way I look at that. And so my hope is that I can help plot out a successful course to the just transition from what we're at today to a model, carbon-free model of the future. There's a lot of people that are going to be impacted, that are impacted by climate change, a whole lot of different demographics across society and across the state of Wisconsin. And I'm hoping that we can consider all of those citizens in our decisions moving forward. But there are also 10,000 plus workers in the state that work in the industry, the electrical industry and the gas industry. And we want to make sure that their voice is heard also and considered as we make recommendations to the governor.
So you sort of touched on this, but why do you think that regulating the state's utilities is in the state's best interest?
Well, my quick response is take a look at California in the early 2000s. They chose what I call the Big Bang approach and almost bankrupted the state and several utilities along the way. I look at it like utilities won't regulate themselves. And so electricity is no longer a luxury item either. It's pretty vital to our everyday life. And the economic impact is just too critical to leave the production of electricity, the transmission and the distribution of it to be unchecked by anybody.
So, Bob, if you had all the power in the energy industry for a day, what would you do?
Yeah, I love that question. So my immediate...
It's fun to think about.
It really is. But my immediate thought is shut it off. Just shut it off. Because you can't do a whole lot in a day.
Uh-huh.
and really shutting it off is not a good answer. But what I mean by that is, get people's attention. So many people do not think about electricity until it's off, when a storm blows through, right? And it's off.
Yes.
So many people have ideas on where we should be today as it relates to this transition to a carbon-free electrical industry, generation being carbon-free. And I think that would get their attention.
You got my attention there.
And maybe we would be able to, kind of put our heads together and really take what I've referred to as this just transition. I don't think anybody can argue that climate change is a real thing. And if they are, they don't really want to have a serious discussion. But I think we can debate what critical state we're at, how fast we need to move, and that discussion needs to be had. If you shut off all the generation in the state today, you wouldn't be able to get it back online, and some of the units would take weeks. And that's just how it works. And so many people don't understand the technical aspects of the electrical industry here.
All right. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining me and co-hosting for these very esteemed guests. Our first interview is with PSC Chairperson Valcq, who has been leading the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin for over a year now. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview to our listeners. And without delay, we'll throw you over to that interview, which will be followed by our interview with Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. We are joined today by Public Service Commission of Wisconsin Chairperson Valcq. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chairperson.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you too, Bob.
Good to see you.
Well, let's get right into the interview here.
All right. Sounds good. So now that you've been the chair for an entire year, can you kind of give us the lay of the land here at the PSC?
Absolutely. It's been a great year. We've had a lot of a lot of firsts at the commission, which is exciting, but can also present some opportunities to learn and to grow. So first and foremost, we started the year by kind of taking a really deep dive into the organization as a whole. We looked at the agency and said, does it make sense to maybe make a little bit of a realignment so that we're more nimble and that we are giving our employees the opportunity to cross-train and to look at some different issues that they might not necessarily have had that opportunity. So we undertook a pretty comprehensive look at the agency, and we reorganized, not that it was in a bad place, but just to make it more efficient. And so we reorganized and we moved some of the divisions around to allow for growth of staff and more efficient processing of dockets. So that was kind of my first foray into welcome, and now you're the head of the agency. So that was it was a good process to go through. And then shortly after I started, we issued the notice for the EV, the generic docket. And Commissioner Nowak started that docket while she was chair. And then when I took over as chair in March, we started going and we got comments from so many different parts of the industry. And then we hosted a workshop. And for me, that was one of the most exciting things that we did because we've never done that before. So we actually invited different parties who had commented on the docket. We said, come to the commission, and the docket coordinator, Joe Fontaine, actually chose and selected the tables where everybody would sit in an effort to get a really good cross-section of opinions. And that led to a lot of great discussion.
I thought so too. I was there. He did a really good job organizing.
He did. And I love that sort of pre-planning of, I'm going to put a person from this particular industry, I'm going to seat them next to this person. It's kind of like planning a wedding. You want to keep all the fun aunts and uncles together.
Keeps the discussion going too, and
Right.
It makes for some pretty creative thoughts to be shared.
Talk some more about this lay of the land here at the PSC. I know some of your biggest focus has been on expanding rural broadband.
Yes, absolutely. So the governor proposed $78 million in his budget, and what ended up getting approved was $48 million, which is an historic investment in broadband for the state of Wisconsin. And having the state broadband office here at the PSC, we have the incredible privilege and responsibility of assigning those grants so that we can get as many unserved and underserved residents in the state of Wisconsin connected to broadband. And really what I have learned over the last year is that broadband is an essential service. It's a lot like electric, water, and heat. People need it to be functioning residents in everyday life. I will also say that we've done a lot of work under the new lead service line legislation that allows water utilities to help customers finance the replacement of lead pipes on their side of the lateral, which is, again, essential to make sure that when people are turning on their taps, that the water that is coming out is safe. It is safe to drink. And finally, the last two things I have to say, the first is that Focus on Energy was ranked as number one in the nation by the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Yes, in terms of being cost effective. And I think that's so much to be proud of.
It really is.
Yes. And then I know that Representative Gilkes talked about this on, I think it was your inaugural.
It was, yes. He was on our first podcast.
Yes. But the omnibus bill that we've worked on with Representative Gilkes and Senator LeMahieu is, I think, it just exemplifies everything that's good about working together and getting all of the appropriate people at the table to talk about what, not just what works for them, but what works for the people in the state of Wisconsin. And I think that omnibus bill is something that everybody should be proud of.
I think so too. We've been enthusiastic supporters of that legislation and really appreciate all of your work on that as well.
Yes, thank you for that too. I mean, it's really been a collaborative effort. And I just can't underscore enough how everybody wins when we all kind of invest in collaboration.
So are there any projects that you've been out to visit in the past year here, or anything that you've been part of approving that kind of make you excited about the job you're doing?
So two things. The first thing is, one of the things I'm really excited about is that we approved the first utility scale solar farms. That is something that, having come from the industry, I never thought that we would see, let alone in 2019. So in total, we approved almost 700 megawatts of solar in 2019, which is just...
That's a lot.
It is. It's astounding. But then in terms of visiting, I have to say one of the best parts of 2019 was having the opportunity to go and award the Focus on Energy Efficiency Awards to small businesses. I teased Matt Sweeney when he joined that one of the first things he got to do was he got to come with me to New Glarus Brewing Company, where we awarded them a Focus Award. But it's great to see energy efficiency in action and to talk with business owners who understand the value that efficiency brings to their business. Because oftentimes we can talk about the social impacts and why it's necessary to curb emissions and to become more energy efficient. But when you get out and you talk to business owners and you understand why they make those decisions, for me, it just kind of underscored the importance of what we do here at the Commission. So that was another highlight.
Excellent. That return on investment really hits the bottom line there, right?
Right, exactly.
You mentioned approving some fairly large solar projects. Can you tell us more about how you view the PSC's role in the clean energy transition that the industry is undergoing?
Yes, absolutely. I've mentioned this before, and it's kind of a work in progress, but it is something that I think about all the time, and that is the roadmap and how we're going to get Wisconsin to zero carbon. And we have one piece of it here at the Commission, right? We look at the energy industry. But through the governor's task force on climate change, we as a state have the ability to look at how we're going to get to zero carbon through many different lenses. So we can look at the industrial sector and what can be done in the industrial sector, the transportation sector, the agricultural industry. So a couple of conversations that we've had initially at the PSC is where we've used the solar farm dockets as kind of a jumping off point to start the conversation with DNR and DATCAP to get us all seated at the table to say, look, this is changing the landscape in Wisconsin and the impact on land, whether it be agricultural land or maybe it's going to be brownfield development. The way that we are siting our power plants is changing, and we need to be cognizant of what that looks like, right? So if you think about an old power plant, the footprint was large, but not as large as thousands and thousands of acres. Right. So it's shifting your mindset and making sure that you have the right people at the table. So do we know what soil type is best suited for a solar farm? We don't want to take the highest producing agricultural lands out of agriculture. We want to be precise and we want to be thoughtful about where these projects go. So I think at the PSC have a really unique and quite frankly, a great opportunity to get all sorts of people seated at the table to think about what's the impact going to be and how can we help start the conversation. So a lot of I think what we do here is we have the ability to convene experts from different areas and sit down and talk about the impact of a particular decision.
So as you're making these decisions, you mentioned leaning on industry experts, and you're going to be joined by an industry expert here at the Commission. The governor just announced his pick for the next PSC Commissioner in Tyler Huebner, who is the former head of Renew Wisconsin. Do you want to tell us more about what you're expecting when Tyler joins you here?
Yes, absolutely. It's really exciting. It's great to be back up to 3 full commissioners, even though I always like to point out we have a quorum with 2. And we're still very good at getting through our dockets, but it's great to have Tyler coming on board. And Bob and I were talking about this. It's nice that he's bringing a technical expertise with him. As much as I love being a lawyer and as much as I appreciate lawyers in general, I think I read that Tyler is going to be the first non-lawyer or non-legislator in quite some time. So I'm really excited. Yeah, I'm really excited to see just that expertise in action.
As the energy industry transitions here in Wisconsin to more renewables, what considerations are you giving to protecting jobs and communities?
So this is another one of those examples of where we kind of look at a utility scale solar project and take that as a jumping off point to start having a conversation. We started a conversation with DWD, Department of Workforce Development, and Labor, to talk about this very issue, because it's something that, if not paid attention to, can have a pretty negative impact. And it's something that has to be constantly in the front of your mind. So one of the things that we know recently went into place is the new legislation that allows political subdivisions to raise their levy to replace revenue that's been lost due to a reduction from a utilities power plant. That was in addition to the earlier legislation, which allowed for sort of a slow rollback of shared revenue payments to communities who hosted power plants. But we have to be creative, and we've talked about job training, retraining, or reclassifying employees. But Bob, you and I know that going from a fossil-fired power plant, a coal plant, for example, to a solar farm, it's not one for one.
Nope, not even close.
Right. And that impact is very real. The impact is on families, and it's on communities, and it's on businesses that operate within those communities. So we have to look at ways with DWD to be thoughtful again. And maybe it's not a matter of, okay, you were a power plant engineer, and now we're going to transition you to a similar role within the company. Maybe it's changing or pivoting altogether and saying you would actually be great in government relations, or you would do really well in plant accounting. But being thoughtful about that. And it is definitely something that we consider, and it's something that we talk about, and we will continue to talk about it with, folks like Labor and DWD.
So our Electric Wire podcast has been kicking off with an energy innovation series discussing topics like renewable energy, electric vehicles, storage, and smart buildings. How do you see all of these things connecting?
They're all connected. So Governor Evers has charged each of his cabinet members with finding ways to connect the dots, as he's fond of saying.
We have heard that.
Yes. But all of these are interconnected. So we talk about the transition to zero carbon. We can't forget about energy efficiency, because energy efficiency has got to play a critical role. If we continue to amp up our usage, we're never going to get to zero carbon, because we're always going to need to produce more.
Right. And electric vehicles in the mix sort of changes that dynamic.
Right.
Does indeed. Yeah.
Exactly. So with increased adoption of EVs, you'll see maybe a change in the load shape of the utilities. I don't know that it's going to be a game changer per se. I think it's going to take a little while for us to see what and if the adoption of EVs does to the load curve. But we'll find out. And they all connect with each other, which is why I'm a big fan of generic dockets. because I think going back to the roadmap, we need to be really, really sure that we're keeping our eyes on all of these different issues and that we're not making decisions in a silo, because they are all interconnected. If utility scale solar is going to be the most economical way to produce energy, we better make sure that the distribution system is resilient enough to handle that transition. And if we don't remember those things, then we risk missing something and missing it in a big way.
So if you had all the power in the energy industry for one day, what would you do?
We're asking this at the end of all of our interviews.
And this has to do with the energy industry, right? Not like making my kids pick up their clothes or things of that nature.
You have that power, don't you?
Yeah, I wish.
Right.
Oh gosh, if I could have all the power, I would find a new, clean baseload technology. That's what I would do.
Excellent answer.
That's a really good answer.
That's a good answer.
Everybody agrees.
Yeah. When I thought of that question too, I wasn't thinking that way. I was thinking like, okay, all the things that are on the table, what would I change? But thinking outside the box is awesome. So you're right. That's what we need.
Yeah, we do. And because we talk a lot about battery storage, and we talk a lot about the intermittent nature of solar and wind, and we talk about the need to, what are we going to do with nuclear? Is fusion going to be a thing? And I every time I talk or I read an article, the resounding answer is, well, we really haven't found the silver bullet yet. So if I had all the power, I would find that silver bullet.
Excellent response.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Chairperson Valcq. All right, and we are joined now by Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. He is the 45th Lieutenant Governor of the state of Wisconsin, elected in November of 2018. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much for having me today.
We're really delighted to have you here with us.
I'm excited to be here.
How important were energy and climate issues to you as you decided to run for statewide office?
So climate and energy issues was probably a big part of my main focus in my campaign. When I ran for Lieutenant Governor, I wanted to make sure that we were putting these ideas and putting these issues out into the forefront, because unfortunately, too often they get put on the back burner. We want to be able to talk about this proactively, and we want to be able to talk about it in multiple ways. Obviously, the environmental protection aspect of it is vital. It's important for us as a society. However, another impact that wasn't always mentioned was the economic impact. If you look at job creation, this is where we have a tremendous opportunity to create good-paying, family-sustaining jobs. That's what's happening in other parts of the country, but it hasn't necessarily been happening here at the rate that it could be. And seeing those examples, gave me, an idea to say, well, we should be looking at this here in Wisconsin. We don't, people aren't drilling for oil here. People aren't mining coal in the state of Wisconsin, but there's an opportunity for us to tap into the energy economy.
Are there experiences you've had in your current role that have helped shape your thinking on these issues?
Oh, absolutely. This past December, I had a chance to go to Madrid for COP25, which is the UN Climate Conference, and there got to meet with leaders from all across the world. But what was highlighted is the role of subnationals, the role of states in combating climate change, especially when the federal government is not as active as they could be. And I say that to say they are virtually inactive, in many instances rolling back the gains that have been made. And so what we have to do as states is step up and strengthen our commitments in many regards so that we can at least meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accord at a minimum. And with that being said, there's the U.S. Climate Alliance, and the states that are represented in the alliance make up over 55% of the U.S. population and 60% of U.S. GDP. So there's still opportunity for us to really engage and do meaningful work and impactful work at the same time. So I think that was the biggest opportunity that I've had. But it's like almost every other week or so, I get a chance to speak at a climate conference or an environmental conference where the experts are there, the people who've been doing the work for so long, and for a long time, it seemed to be in vain. And there's a lot of excitement. People have been waiting for the moment where an administration came in that actually embraced science. They've been waiting for an administration that understood that climate change is a real thing. We have a role and a duty to fight back and push back against climate change. And also, there's a unique opportunity for us as a state to be a national, if not a global leader.
Can you tell us more about your role as the head of the Climate Change Task Force and what you're hoping that the task force might accomplish?
Yes, I'm very excited that the governor has chosen me to lead the Climate Change Task Force. Like I said, it's been a passion of mine for some time. It's where we can see some very significant movement and also impact every community positively across Wisconsin. And in chairing this task force, we want to be sure that we brought people on board from many different backgrounds, different professions, different levels of experience, because it was important for us to make sure that the table wasn't missing people. And it was important for us also to get people in the room who don't always agree, or people in the room who won't always have an opportunity to engage in conversation with each other. And I think that is one of the most important things about it, because so often people talk over or around each other. And in many instances, people have the same ideas, the same goals and passions, but don't know each other and are spend a lot of time recreating the wheel. And we want to do the best that we can to avoid that. And we are tasked with making sure that the state is on track to meet our 2050 clean energy goal. And it's one that, given the people who are on this task force, given the level of experience that we have, I think that the 2050 is a goal that we can beat. I think we have every tool at our disposal to make that happen. You have some people who are committed to seeing that, and we got a number of utilities on board who've committed, or who've made stronger commitments than the state had made in previous instances. So this is a time for us to be very excited. I'm really excited about the membership, and I'm even more excited about the work that we're about to engage in. And thank you for serving on the task force, Bob. It's really great to have you.
So as you alluded to, even before the governor created the Climate Change Task Force, he signed Executive Order 38, which created the state's carbon-free energy goal, as well as the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. How will this office work to help the state meet its carbon reduction goals?
Yep. So the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy is going to work first within state government to make sure that all of our agencies are operating in a more sustainable way, to make sure that we are leading by example, setting some very internal goals, but also working with outside partners, working with utilities, working with partner organizations, higher education, to make sure that we are being as innovative as possible. But a lot of the work is also going to be informed by the task force, so that we are coming up with new ideas. And the task force, we're also going to, we've had our second meeting, but we're getting ready to have public hearings in the month of April. We plan to have 5 in April across the state. And a lot of the work from the task force, as well as the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, is going to be decided by, the work, what comes out of these public hearings and the things that the task force members come up with. People are going to be working in tandem, and that's really exciting to me.
Busy next couple of months on the task
Yeah,
force.
I mean, essentially, the Maria Redmond, who I've chosen to lead the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, she's sort of our sustainability czar.
So can you tell us a little bit more about your goal to have the Climate Change Task Force examine the way environmental issues affect the different demographic groups and communities?
Absolutely. Too often, communities that are impacted by climate change and impacted by environmental hazards, it's not the first thing on their minds, because they're the lower income communities who experience the impacts of climate change far worse than any other group in society. However, we're talking about people who too often, struggle to put food on a plate, are going job to job, working in the gig economy. And it's not the first thing that they're thinking about. There's so many other priorities, immediate priorities that you can actually see in front of your face, tangible things that need to happen in their lives. And this is not always the first thing they think about. So we want to be in a place where we can, talk about what's actually happening and be able to present the research and the data that shows that, these communities are suffering. And we shouldn't have, this level of disproportionate impact on any community in our state and in our nation. And we want to do something about it. And we also want to be able to inform the public to understand what's actually happening, whether it's water quality or air quality, or, how a person could be, or family or community could be more subject to flooding than another community, because these aren't resilient. They aren't designed with the sort of resilience that they need to literally weather a storm.
You've been hosting listening sessions across the state to gather information about how the state should spend funds designated for the EV charging infrastructure grant program. Why is this an important part of your climate agenda?
So it's an important part of the climate agenda because transportation sector makes up a significant portion of total emissions. And there's a move to electrify vehicles, to move towards more electric vehicles on our roads, and understanding that too can be a barrier for a lot of people. We're not talking about cheap vehicles. It's a little expensive to own electric vehicles.
Cost is coming down rapidly.
Cost is coming down. Cost is coming down. Thankfully, cost is coming down. That's one thing. But some people are a little more hesitant to buy an electric vehicle because the idea of having to charge a car when there's a gas station everywhere, it's not as simple for people. But what came up in the task force meeting yesterday actually was, someone mentioned when vehicles with combustible engines first got on the road, it's not like gas stations were everywhere. People had to figure it out, plan their routes. And this is before, GPS was around, and Google Maps and Apple Maps. And it's sort of the same thing now, but it's a different day and age where we come to expect a certain convenience. So that is that's something that keeps people reluctant. And so if we can have a stable infrastructure where people who own electric vehicles can get to a place where they can charge them, I think that is how we play a role in encouraging people to consider options for vehicles with zero emissions.
Can you tell Kristin drives an EV?
I am an EV
jumped
driver.
in. She was ready.
Yeah, she was.
She was ready. She was ready to defend it with all her honor.
I was trying to hold back.
Yeah. Let me scoot back a little bit.
We focused last podcast on electric vehicles, and I shared that I was surprised at how convenient it really is to be able to just charge at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people who don't have an EV yet, they don't realize that 80% or more of charging actually happens at home. And to not have to stop at a gas station most of the time is super convenient. But one of the main barriers that has been identified as a barrier to adoption is range anxiety. So to the extent the state can use this VW settlement money to help alleviate that concern, I think it'll only help.
Yeah, I do think so as well.
One of our presenters yesterday changed that around to range opportunity.
Range opportunity.
Yes.
I was thinking of the term. It slipped my mind. And I'm just thinking too, it's about preparing for the future, right? It's about thinking about the state of Wisconsin 10 years, 25, 50, 100 years from now. We don't want to be in a place where we're left out or left behind when all these other states are moving in that direction and will have the infrastructure necessary. It's the same way I sort of feel like, high-speed rail. That should have been a reality here in the state of Wisconsin, but it's not. And that was due to very short-term thinking.
So shifting gears just a little bit here, if you had all the power in the energy industry for one day, what would you do?
Yeah, I think that you had a really good answer when it comes to holding the keys to the energy infrastructure in the state. But I would say I think that it obviously takes more than a day, but I would want us to be on a track to where all of our these are the goals that I already stated, that 100% of our electricity comes from renewable sources. But I would also add to that, because there's the economic component. I think personally, I would say, Wisconsin is going to commit to being on a track to a Green New Deal. to offer opportunities to communities, to families, schools, where, we look at our public spaces and how we can green our infrastructure, the buildings that already exist, the state capitol, libraries, schools, universities, and say, well, yeah, we're going to make a large scale investment. We are going to retrofit these buildings, put solar on the top of all these roofs of buildings, of properties that we own as a state, and we will be on a track to a green energy future, a clean energy future.
Lieutenant Governor Barnes, thank you
so
much.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Thank you to Chairperson Valcq and Lieutenant Governor Barnes for taking the time to share their insights with our podcast listeners. And again, thank you to the members of the Customers First Coalition for sponsoring our podcast, and to Bob Stone for joining me as a co-host. Please subscribe to The Electric Wire wherever you listen to podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. You can also rate the podcast and leave a review. You can also follow along on Twitter at The Electric Wire. We will tweet out our new episodes and other fun stories, pictures, all of that you can find there. We will be back in 2 weeks for a discussion about the status of wind power in Wisconsin. We're looking forward to being joined by Scott Conan of the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum, and there will be other exciting guests as well. You'll have to stay tuned and check it out.